Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. And this one's a bit meta, don't you think? We're going to be exploring the world of YouTube and its impact on loneliness and mental health,
Mm.
all while actually being on YouTube.
Yeah, it's like we're holding a mirror up to ourselves,
Yes.
right? Using the platform to examine the platform itself.
Exactly. And we've got a really fascinating mix of sources for this one. We've got some academic research from Balcom and DeLeo, a really interesting discussion forum thread we found, even ethical guidelines for social media researchers. Oh, and a psychology clinic's blog post.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
We do. But by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a much better understanding of both the upsides and the downsides of YouTube, especially when it comes to mental health. And hopefully you'll come away feeling a little bit more equipped to navigate this online world consciously.
Sounds good to me.
So,
Thanks.
first off, just the sheer scale of YouTube is mind-blowing. Balcom and DeLeo pointed out that there are 2.6 billion monthly active users. That's a third of the planet.
Oh,
Yeah, the
Wow.
potential for impact there is
Yeah.
massive.
it really is. And that impact can be both positive and negative, which is what makes this whole conversation so interesting. But let's start with the good stuff. Did you know that YouTube is a huge learning powerhouse?
Yeah, I've heard that.
That blog post we have, YouTube, the good, the bad, and the ugly, mentions that there are something like 500 million daily views of educational content.
Wow, 500 million. That's incredible.
Yeah, think about it. You can learn how to do pretty much anything on YouTube.
It's true. I've actually learned how to fix everything from a leaky faucet to my grandma's old record player, all thanks to YouTube tutorials.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's not just practical skills either. Balcom and DeLeo's research also highlighted how YouTube can create these incredibly valuable communities, especially for people who might feel isolated or marginalized in the offline world.
Yeah, finding your tribe online, especially when you're dealing with stuff like mental health challenges, can make all the difference.
Absolutely. But, and here's where that kind of double-edged sword comes in, YouTube also has a darker side. That forum discussion we found actually mentioned this study suggesting that frequent YouTube users might actually be more susceptible to loneliness, anxiety, and even depression.
Really? That seems counterintuitive. You'd think that being constantly connected would make you less lonely.
Right.
But the research points to some potential reasons for this link.
Okay, so what are we talking about here?
Well, remember that massive user base we talked about earlier. All those people create a lot of competition for attention. And to keep people glued to their screens, YouTube relies on algorithms. Think of it like the algorithm's kind of like a picky eater, you know?
Right.
It just keeps feeding you more of what you've already consumed.
So I end up watching hours of sourdough bread baking videos, even though I swore I'd diversify my YouTube interests.
Exactly. And this can create these echo chambers where your existing beliefs are just constantly reinforced, and it can potentially expose you to increasingly extreme content.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not always the healthiest environment, mentally speaking.
And then you've got this whole parasocial relationship phenomenon, which Balcom and DeLeo also discussed in their research. It's where people develop these really intense one-sided connections with YouTubers.
It's easy to feel like you really know these creators, especially if they share a lot of personal details online. You watch their videos every day, you comment on their posts, you feel really invested in their lives. But at the end of the day, it's not a truly reciprocal relationship. And that can lead to some feelings of loneliness and disappointment when you realize that the connection isn't quite as real as you thought it was.
It's like finding out your favorite celebrity doesn't actually read every fan letter.
Exactly.
Disappointing. But what's even more concerning is that blog post we mentioned, YouTube, the good, the bad, and the ugly, highlighted some seriously disturbing trends, particularly on YouTube Kids.
Oh, yeah. That's where parental guidance becomes absolutely crucial. We're talking about disturbing content that uses popular children's characters, but puts them in really violent or inappropriate scenarios, the kind of stuff that can really mess with a young mind.
So YouTube can be this amazing educational tool, but it also has the potential to expose kids to some really harmful content. That's a tough balancing act for parents.
It is. It really underscores the need for parents to be actively involved in what their children are watching. Just because it's on YouTube Kids doesn't automatically mean it's safe or appropriate.
It's like anything else in the world, I guess.
Yeah.
There are incredible things to discover, but there are also some dark corners you need to be aware of.
Exactly. And the more we understand about YouTube's complexities, the better equipped we are to kind of navigate it safely and thoughtfully.
Yeah. I think that's a great point to move on from.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential for YouTube to be both helpful and harmful when it comes to mental health. It's like this coin with two sides, right? But how does all of this actually play out in the real world? Let's maybe zoom in on some specific
Yeah,
examples.
let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay, so Balcom and DeLeo's research actually sheds light on how YouTube's being used by people with various mental health conditions. One study they mentioned focused on folks with borderline personality disorder, or BPD for short.
BPD, that's a pretty complex condition, right?
Yeah.
Involves a lot of really intense emotions and sometimes even self-harm. It's not something that immediately springs to mind when I think about YouTube.
You might be surprised. The study actually found that a lot of people with BPD are turning to YouTube to connect with others who understand their struggles. It's a way to share experiences, find support, realize they're not alone.
So YouTube is actually helping to create a sense of community around a condition that often carries a lot of stigma.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful.
It is. Seeing other people talk openly about their experiences can be so validating and empowering. It can help to kind of chip away at the shame and isolation that often accompany mental health challenges.
But of course, there's always that potential downside. What about the risk of encountering triggering content or misinformation? Not every video about BPD is going to be accurate or helpful.
Oh, absolutely. You're totally right. And that's where critical thinking becomes so important. It's crucial to be really discerning about the sources that you're trusting. Um, Look for creators who are credible, transparent about their qualifications, and present information in a balanced and responsible way.
So don't just take everything you see at face value.
Exactly. Do your research, cross-check information, and just be wary of anything that seems too good to be true or overly alarmist. That applies to YouTube as much as any other source of information.
Okay, makes sense. So Balcom and DeLeo also mentioned studies looking at YouTube's impact on more common conditions like depression and anxiety. What's the takeaway there?
Well, the findings were a bit mixed, which kind of reflects that double-edged sword aspect we keep coming back to. Some studies suggested that spending too much time on YouTube might actually be linked to increased symptoms of depression and anxiety.
Yeah, that's not surprising, given what we've talked about with algorithm bias
Yeah.
and the potential for YouTube to become a bit of a echo chamber.
Right. But on the flip side, some studies also showed that YouTube could be used as a tool for coping with depression and anxiety.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. Sometimes just watching a funny video or listening to some uplifting music can give you a temporary distraction from negative thoughts and feelings. It's kind of like listening to music or watching a movie to unwind and de-stress.
So in moderation, YouTube can actually be part of a healthy coping strategy.
Exactly. And there are even creators who make videos that are specifically designed to provide support and coping strategies for people with depression and anxiety. Like guided meditations, relaxation techniques, or even just personal stories of recovery and resilience.
That's amazing. It's almost like having access to a pocket-sized therapist or support group right on your phone.
In a way, yes. But, and this is important to remember, YouTube is not a replacement for professional mental health care. It's more like a supplement, providing additional resources and a sense of community.
Okay, that makes sense. It's fascinating how many different ways people are using YouTube in relation to mental health. It really speaks to the platform's versatility and reach.
It does, and it highlights the need for a more nuanced understanding of how this technology is impacting our lives, both individually and collectively.
So we've talked about YouTube in relation to specific mental health conditions, but what about the bigger picture? How does YouTube compare to other social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok when it comes to these mental health impacts?
That's a great question. And while we're kind of focusing on YouTube in this particular deep dive, it's important to acknowledge that the research on social media and mental health is still very much evolving. We don't have all the answers yet, and every platform has its own unique kind of dynamics.
That makes sense. But are there any general trends or patterns emerging from the research that seem to apply across the board?
Absolutely. One really consistent finding is that passive social media use, like, mindlessly scrolling through feeds without actually interacting with anyone, tends to be more closely linked to negative mental health outcomes, like increased feelings of loneliness, envy, and dissatisfaction.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so easy to get caught up in comparing yourself to others, feeling like you're not measuring up, or just generally feeling overwhelmed by the constant stream of perfectly curated lives.
Exactly. It's like being bombarded with highlight reels all day long. On the other hand, active social media use, engaging in meaningful conversations, connecting with friends and family, or joining online communities around shared interests, seems to have more positive or neutral effects on mental health.
So it's not necessarily the platform itself that's good or bad, but how we're using it. It's like any tool that can be used constructively or destructively, depending on the user's intent.
I love that analogy. And it really underscores the importance of developing digital literacy skills, both for ourselves and for younger generations. We need to equip people with the knowledge and tools to use these platforms in a way that supports their well-being, not undermines it.
Yeah, we need to kind of move beyond that screen time is evil mentality and start having more nuanced conversations about how to use technology responsibly and intentionally.
I couldn't agree more. It's about shifting from quantity to quality, from mindless consumption to mindful engagement.
Okay, so going back to Balcom and DeLeo, they mentioned some pretty intriguing areas for future exploration. One that really caught my eye was looking at how different types of YouTube content might actually impact mental health.
Oh, that's a fascinating area to explore. Imagine being able to compare the effects of watching, say, beauty vlogs versus educational documentaries versus gaming streams. We might find that certain types of content are more likely to trigger negative emotions or contribute to unhealthy behaviors, while others might actually be more supportive or even therapeutic.
It's like creating a mental health rating system for YouTube content, similar to nutritional labels on food.
I love that. It could help users make more informed choices about what they're watching. Of course, it's not a simple task. Mental health is complex, and what's triggering for one person might be completely harmless for another.
Right, it's not about censorship
Right.
or telling people what they can and can't watch. It's about providing information and empowering people to make choices that align with their own well-being.
Precisely. And it really speaks to the need for more personalized approaches to digital mental health. We need to recognize that everyone's experience with technology is unique, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
It seems like we still have a lot to learn about YouTube and its impact on mental health. It's a constantly evolving landscape, and the research is still trying to play catch-up.
That's the exciting part. There's so much potential here, both for understanding the risks
Mhm.
and for harnessing the power of YouTube for good.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to see how people are already using YouTube in innovative ways to connect, support each other, and destigmatize mental health.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that technology, even something as ubiquitous as YouTube, is ultimately a reflection of ourselves. It can be used to amplify both the best and the worst of human nature.
That's a powerful thought. So knowing what we now know about YouTube's potential impact on mental health, how can we ensure that we're using it responsibly and for good, both as individuals and as a society?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that we'll continue to unpack in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, so we spent this deep dive exploring this fascinating and often kind of contradictory world of YouTube and its impact on mental health. We've seen how it can be a source of both connection and isolation, education and misinformation. So now the big question, how do we move forward responsibly?
Yeah, it's a question I think we all need to be grappling with right now. We've been handed this incredibly powerful tool with the potential to both heal and harm, and we're all kind of figuring out as we go how to use it wisely.
It's not about demonizing YouTube or pretending it doesn't exist. It's about understanding its complexities and finding ways to harness its power for good, while also minimizing the risks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one crucial step there is fostering digital literacy skills. We need to be teaching people, especially young people, how to critically evaluate information online, how to be discerning about the sources they trust, and to recognize the signs of unhealthy online habits.
It's like giving them a mental health toolkit for navigating this whole digital world, equipping them with the knowledge and skills to protect their well-being. In a landscape that can be pretty overwhelming at times.
Exactly. And this education needs to start early. We can't just assume that kids are going to intuitively know how to navigate these complex online spaces. Having open and honest conversations about the potential risks and benefits of YouTube and social media is essential.
So instead of don't talk to strangers, it's don't believe everything you see on YouTube. Dinner table conversations for the digital age.
I love that. And it's not just about lecturing either. We need to be modeling healthy online behaviors ourselves, if we're constantly glued to our screens. Mindlessly scrolling or getting sucked into arguments in the comment section, what message are we sending?
Yeah, actions speak louder than words, right? We need to show kids how to use YouTube for learning, for connecting, for creative expression, while also setting healthy boundaries and prioritizing real-world interactions.
Finding that balance is key. Embracing the good while being mindful of the potential pitfalls. And I think part of that mindfulness involves recognizing that YouTube, like any form of media, can be addictive.
Oh, absolutely. The platform is designed to keep you hooked. With those endless recommendations and autoplay features, it's so easy to lose track of time. and spend hours watching videos,
Yeah.
even when you have other things you should be doing.
And recognizing the problem is the first step, just like with any other addiction. If you find yourself constantly reaching for your phone to watch YouTube, even when you're feeling stressed or down, it might be time to take a step back.
Time to kind of reevaluate your relationship with the platform. Maybe that means setting some time limits, curating your subscriptions, or even taking a break altogether.
Yeah, it's about being honest with ourselves about how YouTube is affecting our lives
Hmm.
and being willing to make changes if necessary. And it's important to remember that there are resources available if you're struggling.
Absolutely. There are therapists who specialize in this, support groups, tons of helpful online resources. You don't have to go through this alone.
Exactly. And I think the conversation about YouTube and mental health is far from over. As technology keeps evolving, we need to keep asking these questions, exploring the research,
Yeah.
and adapting our approaches.
It's a continuous learning process for sure. Stay curious, stay informed,
Mm.
and stay engaged in the conversation.
That's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. We're not just summarizing information, we're exploring ideas, challenging assumptions, and hopefully empowering you to make more informed choices.
Well said. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of YouTube loneliness and mental health. It's been a really thought-provoking journey. And I hope you've gained some valuable insights about your own relationship with this incredibly powerful platform.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving to use this technology in a way that promotes well-being for yourself and those around you.
Perfectly put. Until next time, deep divers, stay curious.